Her ex is still on the deed and they can't find him. Now what? Now, if you follow Chan and Jamal on Facebook, you may have seen a video they posted yesterday where Chan revealed something that immediately caught my attention as an estate planning attorney. Her ex is still on the deed to one of her houses. Now, apparently, they agreed that he would come off the deed, but when it was time to actually make that happen, he disappeared. No social media, emails bouncing back, they just can't find him. And Jamal basically says, I plan on helping to pay this house off. I don't want another man benefiting from the money I'm putting into this property. And then he says something else that's really important. He wants to be added to the deed. Jamal, we're going to come back to that because depending on 4 little words that might be on the deed, you could potentially put tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars into paying off a house that neither you nor your daughter gets if something happens to Chan. I'll explain that in a minute. I'm attorney Unique Auto. I'm a Florida estate planning attorney, and let's talk about it. Of course, Chan and Jamal, this is not legal advice to you. I haven't seen your deed. I don't know what state your property is even in, and there are facts we'd need to know before anyone could tell you exactly what your options are. But this is such a good real-life example of why deeds and estate planning matter. First, being on the deed is a big deal. A deed is not just a piece of paper with somebody's name on it. If Chan's ex is actually a current owner on that deed, depending on exactly how title is held, he may have a legal interest in that property, and it sounds like he does. And here's the part people sometimes misunderstand. You generally cannot just decide, well, we broke up, he doesn't live here anymore, I can't find him, take his name off. Obviously, right? That's what started this conversation. If he owns an interest in the property, ordinarily, he would have to voluntarily transfer that interest by signing the appropriate deed, or there needs to be some other legal mechanism that changes ownership. So when Chan said he's supposed to be off the deed, my lawyer brain immediately went, why? Was there a written agreement? Was there a court order? Was that part of a divorce or property settlement? Well, she said they were engaged, so not a divorce. Or was it simply an agreement that was made between the two of them? Because those facts can make a huge difference. Second, adding Jamal does not necessarily remove the ex. This is probably the biggest misconception I heard in a similar conversation. So Jamal essentially is saying, put me on the deed and then we can work together to get him off. I think that's what I heard. If I'm wrong, you can correct me. But adding Jamal and removing the ex are 2 completely different legal issues. Depending on how the property is currently titled and what transfers are legally available, adding Jamal could potentially mean you've now created a situation involving 3 ownership interests instead of solving the original 2 owner problem. So before anybody starts signing or recording another deed, I would want an attorney to look at the current recorded deed first. Who owns the property? How is it titled? What interest does each person actually have? And what documents exist regarding the ex's agreement to transfer his interests? Don't start moving names around on deeds until you understand what the existing deed actually does. Third, what if you really can't find the ex? And that sounds like what Chan and Jamal are saying. This was the part that made me want to make this video. Chan said they had to hire a private investigator, and actually locating him may very well be the very first or the very best practical step. Because if he really did agree to transfer his interest and you can locate him, the solution then becomes much simpler. Get the appropriate deed prepared, have him execute it correctly, and get it recorded. But let's assume you really can't find him. You've tried, you've exhausted all reasonable efforts, and you cannot find this man. That doesn't necessarily mean Chan is stuck owning property with him forever. Depending on the state, the facts, and the documents involved, there may be a court process available. For example, if 2 people own property together and one owner wants to end that co-ownership, a partition action may be an available remedy. Here in Florida, we would file a petition for partition. Essentially, you're asking a court to resolve the co-ownership. But here's what a partition action doesn't mean. Judge, I can't find him, so take his name off and give me his share or give me the property in full. His ownership interest doesn't simply disappear because nobody knows where he is. There are procedures for attempting to locate and serve an absent owner. And in some circumstances, alternative forms of service may be available after the required search has been completed. And ultimately, depending on the case and the law of that state, the court may be able to resolve what happens with that property and the absent owner's financial interest. So hiring a private investigator may not be the end of the road. It's a good first step. It may actually be part of documenting the efforts necessary to move the legal process forward. Now, fourth, Jamal, before you pay that house off, let's get back to the part that really made my estate planning brain start spinning. Jamal, you said you plan to or would like to, something like that, help pay off this house. And I completely understand your concern, right? You don't want to pay $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever number ultimately is into paying off a property while another man has legal ownership interest in it. Because paying the mortgage does not necessarily equal ownership. Writing a $50,000 check towards somebody else's mortgage doesn't automatically mean or doesn't at all mean that you now own it or have $50,000 worth of interest in that house. But there's an even bigger legal issue here. You and Chan just had a beautiful baby. Congratulations, by the way. She is adorable. So let's imagine something for a second. Let's say you put $50,000 into paying off this house. And let's say we pull the deed and discover Chan and her ex own that property as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Those are the four little words I mentioned earlier. Joint, right of survivorship, okay? If that's how the property is actually titled, and if Chan were to pass away before her ex, her interest could pass automatically to him. Not to you, not to your baby. Her ex could potentially become the owner of 100% of the property by operation of deed. Think about that. You could spend years putting your family's money into paying off this house, believing you're building wealth for your wife and your daughter. And if the deed is structured that way and something happens to Chan first, the ex could end up owning the entire property. And what happens to that property when he eventually passes away? Well, that's no longer controlled by Chan's estate plan or yours. It would depend on his estate plan and the inheritance laws that apply to him. So potentially, wealth that you thought you were building for your daughter could ultimately benefit his family instead. And that is why it's so important to understand the benefits of proper estate planning. This is not just about a real estate issue. It is an estate planning issue. Your will doesn't necessarily override a deed. This is something I wish more families understood. You can have a beautiful will, you can have a beautiful trust, you can have an entire estate planning binder, like the ones behind me, sitting on your bookshelf. But if an asset is titled in a way that transfers ownership automatically at your death, your will doesn't necessarily get to direct it. That's why when I do estate planning, I'm not only concerned about what your documents say, I'm concerned about how your assets actually are titled. Because your estate plan and your asset ownership have to work together. So Chan and Jamal, here's where I would start. The first thing I would want to see is the actual recorded deed. Not what anybody remembers signing, not what somebody thinks the deed says, the recorded deed. Then I want to know what state is the property in? Exactly how are Chan and her ex listed as the owners? Is there a right of survivorship? Was Chan married to the ex? I think she said she wasn't, so we can scratch that. Is there a written agreement, judgment, settlement, or other documents saying the ex was supposed to transfer his interest? What efforts have already been made to locate him? And once you know these things, and you may already know, but I would encourage you to sit with a lawyer, then you can determine whether this is potentially something that can be resolved by locating him and getting the appropriate deed signed, or whether you're looking at some type of court process to resolve the ownership. And then Once the ex issue is resolved, I would have a second conversation with you. How should Chan and Jamal own this property going forward? Because now you're married. You have a child together, maybe more. I think I saw something out there. You're building wealth together. So what happens if something happens to Chan? What happens if something happens to Jamal? Does the survivor receive the property? Should the property ultimately benefit your daughter? Is there a trust involved? What happens if your daughter is still a minor when you die? God forbid. That's the real estate planning conversation. And for everybody watching, here's the reason I want you to take a real close look at this situation with Chan and Jamal. Who is on your deed matters. A breakup doesn't automatically remove someone from a deed. Marriage doesn't automatically fix an old deed. Paying the mortgage does not necessarily make you an owner. And your will does not necessarily override the way your property is titled. So if you have an ex, a relative, a deceased family member, or somebody else sitting on a deed who shouldn't still be there, don't wait until somebody dies to figure it out. Because at that point, a problem that may have been fixable can become much more complicated and much more expensive. Chan and Jamal, congratulations again on your beautiful baby. And Jamal, before you pay off that house, let's figure out who actually owns it. I'm attorney Unique Otto, a Florida estate planning attorney. I talk about estate planning through these types of situations that we see happening in real life, because sometimes the best way to understand why you need a plan is to see what can happen when the plan isn't there. If you want to protect what you're building and make sure it actually reaches the people you're building it for, subscribe. Plan wisely, live confidently. I'll see you next time.